All right, we're back here on SportsLine. Steve Layman with you tonight. Predators go down in the Stanley Cup final to the Penguins, 4-2. What a run it was, though. 60 days from start to finish in the playoffs for the Predators. This was a team that was the 16th and final team into the playoff field. 8th seed in the Western Conference. Went up against the Stanley Cup favorite Blackhawks in round 1. And they swept them. Pekka Rinne stood on his head as he did much of this playoff run. New stars emerged in that series. Then you play a very different looking series against St. Louis in round 2. More guys step up. You lose a guy in Kevin Fiala. Vern Fiddler steps into the lineup, makes immediate dividends. Pontus Aberg becomes a real key contributor for this team over the final 3 series. Preds win that series in 6. Then they face the Pacific Division champions, a Ducks team with revenge on the mind after last season. And the Preds are able to beat them in 6 games, even without Ryan Johansson, who was lost in that series. Mike Fisher out for the last couple of games of that series. And then they run up against the defending Stanley Cup champion Penguins, a team with as much firepower as anybody in the league. One of the most explosive teams, frankly, we've ever seen in the league in terms of their ability to score goals and pile them up in prolific numbers. Sidney Crosby, one of the all-time greats in the NHL. This is a loaded team, and it's a championship team with experience and guys that know how to get the job done. The Preds were green in this. And frankly, when you think about the injuries, no Ryan Johansson in this series at all. No Kevin Fiala and his speed and help. Colin Wilson misses the first 4 games of this series. Ryan Ellis gets hurt and misses big chunk of Game 5 and was severely hampered last night, although he gave it a gutsy go and played his normal workload of minutes for the most part. When you think of all that, to me it's more remarkable that they got it to 6 games, that they were maybe the correct call and a minute or so away from forcing a winner-take-all Game 7 on Wednesday night. The effort of this team was simply remarkable throughout the playoffs, and in the final was no different. They ultimately did not win. They ultimately did not hoist the Stanley Cup. That honor went to the Penguins last night, but you're talking about one of the great teams of all time on the other side, and the Predators' top line included Pontus Aberg, who played a big chunk of this season in Milwaukee in the minor leagues. You had Frederick Gaudreau, who only played 9 games all regular season, centering for you in this entire series, and he led the team in goals with 3. Guys stepped up and played to a level that made this a series when it probably shouldn't have otherwise been one. When you looked at the injury factors for the Preds, and there will be people out there that say, oh, the Penguins had injuries too, and they did. Chris Letang is their best defenseman. He's certainly their best offensive defenseman. They missed him in a big way in the last couple rounds of this postseason. There's no question about that. Nick Bonino goes down with that broken tibia when he took that shot off the leg in Game 2. He's a loss. There's no question. But Bonino's a 3rd or a 4th line center for them. And they still have Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin as centers. Jake Gensel, who's a superstar in the making as a scorer. Phil Kessel, who's been a star in the league, up there on those top lines. That's the heart and soul of the Penguins team. Those guys were all there, and they all made an impact. Ryan Johansson is the Predators' top playmaker. He is also their most physical presence in terms of a defensive centerman who could have gone against Sidney Crosby or Evgeny Malkin shift after shift after shift in this series. The Preds didn't have that luxury. They also didn't have a guy who, even now, after he missed the final 8 games, so 40% of the entire Predators playoff run, Ryan Johansson sat out for, he was, I think, tied for 3rd on the team in points in the postseason, without playing 40% of the games. That tells you how effective he was when he was in there. And besides the fact of just losing his individual contributions, when you take him out of the lineup, you had to mess up all of the other lines that were so good in the first 2.5 series in these playoffs. You take Johansson off the top line, you move Sissons up there. Sissons was phenomenal filling up into that role. I think you can be very excited about the future with Colton Sissons in this lineup for the Predators. But even then, he's there with Forsberg and not Victor Arvidsson, which was your top line when everybody was available. You move Panas Aberg up there. So you're breaking up Forsberg and Arvidsson as well. You're breaking up every line as you move down. That was the damage of losing Ryan Johansson. And I said this at the time. When he went down, the hope of winning the Stanley Cup essentially went out the door for the Predators, because that's how devastating the injury was. I also said that I thought in the Anaheim series, they had a chance for guys to be galvanized and to come together and figure out how to win Game 5, the first game without him, and that is exactly what they did. And then once they did that, there was a shot that the arena, Bridgestone Arena in Smashville, in that environment could get them over the top in Game 6 and get them into the Stanley Cup final. And that's what happened. That was a game they got outshot 41-18. They were completely outplayed. But the arena was awesome, and Pekka largely stood on his head that night, and the Predators advanced. But how do you do it against a team as good as the Penguins with that makeshift lineup in a best-of-7 series? I thought they came out of the gates really well in Game 1, and this will always be the key for this series to me. They get that early goal wiped away in Game 1. Wiped away goals, by the way, a theme in this series that are going to haunt Predators fans for a long time. If that one sticks and the momentum stays on their side and they somehow win Game 1, where they were the much better team for the vast majority of the game, this series looks different. If it's 1-1 coming back from Pittsburgh after the first 2 games, with those 2 games in Bridgestone, I mean, it would have been very possible for this to be a 3-1 series going back to Pittsburgh for Game 5. I virtually guarantee you it's not a 6-0 blowout if that's the case. And even if it is, you have a closeout potential at home at Bridgestone Arena in Game 6. That, to me, is remarkable with that lineup. But as the series went along, and when you miss that opportunity early, this is a gutsy, gritty Penguins team that had been there before and has the talent that, as they got to understand the matchups a little bit better and where they could put Crosby and Malkin against certain matchups of the Predators, they started to exploit that. They were more dangerous in Game 4 than they were at any time during the first 3 games, even though Pekka Rinne was incredible in stopping shots in that game, and the Preds ultimately won 4-1. They continued that in Game 5 in the blowout win in Pittsburgh, and they came back last night and had a bunch of great opportunities. The Penguins got better as the series went along, and there were just no options. Peter Laviolette pressed all the right buttons in the playoffs until he had no more options to push. And that's, I think, ultimately what happened here. This was a team that was beat up, didn't have some of its top guys, and just ultimately couldn't match up to the firepower. They go 123 minutes to close the series without getting a goal on Matt Murray. Back to the phones we go. Let's go to Rick. Rick, good evening.
Good evening. How you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for the call.
I agree with you on those matchups. And another thing I noticed last night, if we get better on our power play, we can take away a trophy ourselves.
Sure. Yeah, the Preds started the series 4 of 10 on the power play. Looked really good, but then in Game 4, the Penguins made some significant adjustments of how they were defending it, specifically before they ever got into the attacking zone. And the Preds never got a power play goal after that in the series. 0 for 4 last night. That was huge. When they killed off the 5-on-3 and then the 5-on-4 in the third period, that was a huge momentum swing that gave the Penguins a lot of jump at that point. And obviously they scored a few minutes later and won the game. So you're absolutely right. Specialty teams early in the series, the Preds dominated. Later on in the series, it became a liability.
Yeah. Well, maybe they should have given us something to work toward, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what the guys said last night, Rick, is they said, look, as painful as it is right now, we're one of the few teams in the league that understands what it takes to get here and now what it takes to win once you get here. And so it's our responsibility to sit there and jump into the mode of we're going to use this as fuel. We're going to use this to fuel our fire to work this offseason and to get back into things next camp to make another run at next year. It's very difficult to do. So many games that you have to play. I mean, the Predators played 104 games this year to get to Game 6 of the Stanley Cup final. You got to come back and play 82 in the regular season next year. That is a lot of hockey. It is very difficult to come back from that, but this is a young team. There's a lot of talent, and they're going to be one of the teams that people think will be really good next year in the Western Conference, in the Central Division, and fighting for the Stanley Cup once again. Great run. We'll see how they can capitalize on it next year. All right, we'll take a break. We'll come back. We will hear from head coach Peter Laviolette, some of the guys as well, plus a special look back on this Predators season coming up in just a little bit. You're watching SportsLine on News Channel 5+.